afternoon, or good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Grover.
I'm Kristen Kersey.
And we're thrilled to welcome you to Stirring the Pot with Florence Fabricant. We've been doing this for a number of years, and we've had some of the top culinary celebrities in the world, but having Tom Colicchio here today is definitely a high moment. What I wanted to say is Florence is not only the interviewer for this series, but she's also part of the fabric of this community. She got her writing career started right across the street at the East Hampton Star. And as a member of our board, in addition to hosting this series, where a phone call from Florence is like a phone call from God for a lot of people in the business, she also does the menus for almost all of our benefit events. And she's just a tremendous asset to us and a good friend to Guildhall and a good friend to this community in general. And also, this kind of series goes way back in our history. I found a picture in the archives of Craig Claiborne and Pierre Franey on stage doing a cooking show, but it was the 60s, so there was no video. So they put a big mirror over the stage on an angle so you could see what they were doing. So Florence continues that tradition, and we're really grateful to her. Now Kristen, I brought her up here because she helps organize this whole event and the breakfast, which happens beforehand, and she works with all of our corporate sponsors, and none of this could happen without them. Many of them come back year after year. So thank you for that, and Kristen's going to tell you who has helped us out.
Thank you. Yeah, we'd like to give a tremendous thank you to all of our sponsors, our lead sponsor, Chupo Cabinetry, who created this beautiful set that we get to see every single week. They bring it in every morning and they take it back after the program. They do it every single week. Cinderella, who brings all the incredible food that you get to see here and enjoy this morning. Also, we have to thank Sub-Zero Wolf & Cove, one of our major sponsors as well. And we'll thank Rotari, who gave us all that beautiful sparkling wine. And Splash Mixers with the beautiful bar car. And thank you to Sotheby's International Realty as well.
Quick trivia prize, and if you raise your hand and if you get the answer right, you'll get 2 tickets to next week, which is an interview with Alex Guarnaschelli, and then there'll be a follow-up question to that, and I'll give away another 2 tickets. So the question is, what restaurant, make sure you raise your hand, don't shout it out, what restaurant was Tom Colicchio the chef at that was named for a famous artist? What year? Well, I'll give you a hint. It starts with an M. Oh, wait, I see a hand. No? Yes. You got it, Mondrian. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so 2 tickets. Say your name? Arlene Slavin has won 2 tickets. Joe Brondo, you got that follow-up question.
Yep.
Follow-up question, maybe a little harder. Why was it named Mondrian? Anybody want to take a guess? Mondrian had something to do with the site. Yes. What? No? You give up? Sort of. That's sort of close. There was art of his on site. He had something in the building. Oh, you all shouted it out. Okay. All right, I'm going to give you the tickets. What? Brenda Hirsch won 2 tickets next week. Okay, thank you.
What was the answer?
Oh, it was where his studio was. Yes. All right, easier questions next week. All right, thank you so much. Enjoy the program.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out and sitting indoors on this beautiful day, but this is going to be really fun. I'm thrilled that Tom Colicchio is joining me for Stirring the Pot, finally. He is familiar with the region for sure, and actually has a house in Mattituck. He has such a list of accomplishments. It's awesome. Not only restaurants in Manhattan in a ton of locations, but also Nassau County, Las Vegas, LA, and of course he does all of this television, no judging today, but he does all this television, and also what I find the most impressive is that he has used his renown as a chef to become a spokesperson, very, very passionately promoting fairness in food, anti-hunger causes, proper agricultural policy. He's a mover and shaker with the help of his wife, Lori Silverbush, who's a documentary filmmaker. They've made a film about hunger in America. It's very, very important to see, and as well as he knows his way around a lamb chop or a piece of fish, he knows his way through the halls of government, and I think in the long term, his impact in that regard will be everlasting. So welcome, Tom, and thank you for being here.
Florence, when she said finally, it's because for the last 5 years she's been nudging me to get here, and I keep saying, "Oh, next summer I'll do it. Next summer I'll do it." And so I finally agree. It's sometimes hard for me to sort of make that journey from the North Fork over to the South Fork. It's
Different personality.
it's a long trip. But
you take
I
the
got
ferry
here.
or drive?
I took the ferry. You know, in fact, I should have taken the boat, which would have been easier, but I took the ferry.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the ferry. The ferry's
How
nice.
much time do you spend out there?
Most of the summer. I'll usually come July 1st, I move myself, the kids, and the dogs, and the dog. I should have dogs. I have more dog. And I go back and forth, and Lori goes back and forth as well. Yeah, but yeah, we
Does
try.
being there influence your food, your cooking in any way?
You know, that's a good question. I started gardening about 6-7 years ago. We put in some raised beds, and I have about 19 5x7 raised beds, and I become a passionate gardener. Usually hard to get dirt out of my fingernails these days, but that has. But I cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner at home when I'm home in the summer. And a lot of times, little things that I'm working on, even if I'm not working, it's not the dish that I'm actually serving friends or whatever, I'm thinking things through in my head, and often dishes end up on a menu. So I go back to when I did the Topping Rose House out here. I was a chef there for a short period of time. A lot of the dishes that I was working on at home ended up on that menu. Are bits and pieces of it, ideas of it, and so yeah,
They hadn't developed the garden to the extent back then when you were there.
I brought the gardener in, but then the different gardener. But I think they have a different gardener now. Yeah, because Bill Campbell, who owns it, he had an acre next door, and it was just kind of scrub and stuff. And I was like, "Bill, let's clear it out, put a garden in here." And it took a little arm twisting, but we did it, and that was a real feature. That was a lot of fun to do that. But that's what got me hooked.
Really?
That's when I started gardening here.
And so what do you grow?
Oh God! Starting in the spring, peas and sugar snap peas, like all the spring radishes, beets, carrots, arugula, lettuces, and then we move into zucchini and patty can squash and eggplant. So I have 5 different kinds of eggplant right now, and then obviously tomatoes, and it just goes into the fall into squashes and stuff. But we also have raspberries and blackberries, gooseberries, currants. It's not stop. There's kale and broccoli rabe, and it just goes on and on.
Where's your farm stand?
That's a good question. I should have one.
By appointment.
So of course, what I started doing, if you have all this left, anybody who gardens knows that when cucumbers start, you have a ton of cucumbers, and I don't think you can keep up with eating cucumber salad. So of course, we start making pickles, and so I jar a lot. I jar and can a lot. And Lori jokes around that I have the heart and soul of a Depression-era housewife. But it's fun. I enjoy it. And it's great. You know, there's some science behind this. The idea of getting that close to the earth and the dirt. The mycelium is actually really good for your psyche, and sort of it relaxes me. If I can get out there, especially if I'm not rushing, if I don't have somewhere to go, if I'm trying to get 2 hours in the morning and I'm rushing, that's not fun. But if I have a couple hours in the morning, first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock, get a cup of coffee, get out in the garden, you take your time, it is the most relaxing thing I've ever done. Short of being 120 miles offshore on a boat, where I get the best sleep of my life. There's something about it. There's something about going into the garden every day and little things happen. And you dig through, you plant melons and you forget that they're even there. And all of a sudden you're digging through and you look, oh, there's a melon. It's got this big and it's almost. And so little things like that is, during the course of the summers, it's fun. It's a real treat.
Are you big into recycling, like serving carrot tops in the salad and cucumber peels in a drink?
No. I'll tell you why though. Because it's not all for reducing food waste, but I don't think that's the actual way to do it. I don't think you can make that much of an impact. It's kind of nice and, but I compost.
I had potato peel consomme at a Michelin 2-star restaurant in Paris. I can't really rave about it.
Yeah. Again, these things, I think we have a huge problem with food waste in this country. We waste 40% of what we produce. And so when you think about that, the average consumer will throw out about $1,500 to $1,800 worth of groceries a year. But when you think about that, it's not just the produce and the carrots and stuff like that going in the garbage. It's all the fuel, all the labor that go into producing that. And it's also this idea that someone's work, we devalue completely. A farmer's work is so devalued that we could throw away what they produce and not really think about it. And so little things like that, where you all of a sudden you found a whole flurry of recipes to try to deal with trimmings, and Dan Barber did his whole pop-up, and that's all great. That's not going to move the needle on food waste, but what it does is it starts a conscience. It starts people thinking about it. And then you start coming up with strategies. Like I do this every Friday. I just go through the refrigerator and find everything that's starting to go and make a soup or pasta or something with it. But then there's also the idea where if you compost it, it's not waste. If it goes into a landfill and then creates methane, not only is it waste, but now we're actually adding to climate change. And so, but there's some great solutions on a large scale. In fact, I'm working with a company called KDC Ag. They're based in New Jersey, and they are creating these huge digesters, and they're taking grocery waste from supermarkets. So they have contracts with large supermarkets, and they're taking all of their waste stream, and first they turn it into like a brown sludge, and then it could be purified, and they first started using it for fertilizer, and they were doing some studies with Driscoll, and they were getting a 40% better yield out of berries with Driscoll, and so they realized they couldn't actually make enough of that. And so they started making chicken feed and pig feed. So we've been working with some of the large chicken growers, working on a way to actually make that recipe work. But then we also sort of realized that we can actually, there's a huge market in pet food. And so the whole idea of this is if you can come up with a zero waste chicken, this chicken, they're fed soy and corn. If you can actually move away from that, because we overproduce soy and corn, and so what we have to do is we have to create ethanol with it because we have nothing else to do with it. But if you could take that waste stream and start feeding animals, which if you think about it, when we learned about farming when we were kids in school, that's what they did. And so now we're just going back to that, but this is on a large scale. And so, and then we can also use it for fish farms as well.
But that's what Ariane Degan is doing. She's collecting scraps from, well, Dan Barber, among others, and having them fed to the chickens that she sells from Pennsylvania.
Right. And so that's a great thing to do, taking your food waste and your waste streams and feeding animals. That's why I do things on a large scale. But I think the little things that we read about, that you write about, I think that's great. But really, what that does is it just gets people thinking along the lines of how we can reduce waste.
Well, before we even get to the carrot peel, the whole idea of people accepting a less than perfect looking carrot, or I'm the one who goes and rummages around the tomatoes at the farm stand, and if there's a little blemish or something, usually those are the ripest ones. And those are the ones that I'll buy because I know I can cut away that, I don't need a perfect tomato when I'm chopping it up and putting in sauce. So.
Right. But also, that when you go to the farm stand, you don't see that perfect tomato because they're growing a lot of heirlooms and things like that aren't that perfect round tomato. That perfect round tomato was designed to be that perfect round tomato. And you ask yourself why they taste terrible. Because they were designed to, number one, there's a great book called Tomato Land. You know the book Tomato Land by Barry Esterbrook, I think it is. And he goes and looks at tomato production in Florida. And so essentially they take these used fields and they cover them and they poison the field. So nothing grows in this field. So all the pests are gone. And then they have to use inputs to grow this tomato. And they grow this perfect tomato. It's a 5x6, and the 5x6 means that when you put it in the box, it's 5 rows one way, 6 rows the other way. But they're perfectly round, they're all the same size. But
They wanted to do square ones.
they tried. But he noticed as he was going down the street, there was a tomato truck in front of him, and all these tomatoes were falling off the truck, but they weren't squashing, they weren't breaking up. They were just bouncing down the street. And so he came up and he grabbed one and realized these things, they pick them when they're green and hard, and then they put them in oxygen, and they ripen, they turn red, they don't necessarily ripen up. And that's why these tomatoes are terrible. And yet we eat these things all winter long. So these perfect tomatoes, they're bred to be that perfect tomato, but they're not breeding for flavor, which is killing. Right now there's, we hear GMO this and GMO that, and I'm not someone who hates on GMO. I think there's a use for it, but I just wish some of these guys would actually come together and gals in the lab and actually figure out a way to make them taste better, as opposed to withstand glyphosate or something that again you could store for a long period of time. But they could do that. They can actually make stuff taste better, but they just don't do that. So
Well, it was interesting. Dan Barber had written this op-ed piece in the Times about seeds and about the source of seeds and how those are manipulated by, there are only 4 seed companies globally, and now Monsanto has been taken over by Bayer. And 2 days later in the New York Times, there was a full-page ad from Bayer, and that ad talked about their products called crop protection products. Euphemism for herbicides, pesticides, and everything they spray.
right. Yeah, seeds. Dan started the seed company, 7 Row Seed, I think it's called, and I actually have some of the seeds. But yeah, the idea that, again, we go back to farmers used to keep seeds. Now they're not allowed to anymore because the seeds are all patented, and so they actually have to buy seeds every year. And if they do keep them, they actually don't produce well the following year. Yeah, we're kind of giving up our food sovereignty to 4 companies that kind of have us over a barrel, I guess. But anybody seen Little Big Farm, Big Little Farm? Movie? It came out a while. It's fantastic. You should see this. These couple, in order to give their dog a better life, they decided to pack it all in. She was a chef, I guess, a caterer, and he was a cameraman doing documentary film on wildlife. And they decided to buy this farm in Moore Park, California, just north of LA. And the soil, and this is what you see on these big farms, the soil was just dust. And they hired this consultant, and the consultant said, listen, you can bring this back. It's going to take 7 years, and this is how you do it. And it started with compost. And how many acres it was, and they planted fruit trees, and they planted vegetables, and they had animals. And one by one, all these things started going wrong because everything was out of balance. And the guy told them that it's going to take 7 years for this to balance out, and you're going to have problems. And then he passed away, I think, 4 years into it, or 5 years into it. And so they were at a loss. And one great scene, they all of a sudden had these snails that started, there's an infestation of snails in their orchard. And they're losing all this fruit. And so one day, somehow they saw one of their sheep chomping on this snail. They're like, well, okay. So they took all of their sheep and let them go out in the orchard. And then the snails were wiped out. This idea of balance. They did the same thing with birds. The birds were eating all the fruit. They were losing all their fruit. And they realized that maybe we should get some birds of prey. So they got an owl house, and they got some owls in. And then they had some falcons and stuff come in. And they took care of the bird population, so it just became more in balance. And they were able to actually harvest the fruit, as opposed to feeding it to the chickens after the snails or the birds destroyed it. But this whole idea that we moved away from this way of farming. This goes back to the 70s, when Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture, made his famous line, get bigger, get out, to farmers. And so they were just buying bigger fields, growing fence post to fence post, getting rid of all wetlands and things like that. And we ended up with this again, a way of producing food where we can feed a lot of people, mostly, again, grain and corn and things like that. But we moved away from actually producing food that we eat. And meaning when I say food that we eat, meaning food that we know is food and it's in our refrigerator, that's in the supermarket, vegetables and things like that. And so, but then the question is, you know, on that small scale, can you feed the masses, especially a growing population? And so, again, I think that there's a balance somewhere to be found between producing massive amounts of food that we have to, but also finding a way to keep those smaller farmers that are growing on 100 acres or so. How do you keep them farming? How do you keep them, you know, in generations of farmers? We have it out here. We see it on the North Fork as well. A lot of the younger generation, they don't want to farm anymore. And so how do you figure out ways to do that? We have the land trust out here that does a great job of buying those development rights. But I think that we're losing farmland, we're losing farmers, and it just becomes concentrated too. Where when we talk about farming now, you go out to the Midwest and we're talking about 4,000, 5,000 acres at a time. And we're talking about just large agribusiness that owns these. The farmers don't anymore. And so that, to me, is a recipe for disaster. And then the question is, are we feeding the world? We're really not. We are feeding with all that stuff. We're feeding animals. We're not feeding people. And the animals, obviously, are feeding people. But it doesn't seem to sort of be sustainable. And in fact, a lot of people believe it's not.
Let's back up a bit. How did you get started being a chef? Why did you become a chef?
Okay.
Why did you go into cooking?
Yeah.
I don't think your story is as well known as some.
No. You know, I started cooking at home when I was about 12, I guess. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And I started cooking at home, and I remember, there are a few things that I remember. One, watching my mother make pancakes from a box mix going, I could do that. It wasn't that complicated. And so I started doing that. But also,
How old were you? 21?
No, 12, I think. But going further back, so I mentioned earlier, I love fishing, I love being offshore. When I was about 5 or 6, my grandfather, he'd go crabbing and clamming and fishing, but mostly crabbing. And I would start going with him, I think when I was about 5 or 6, and I had 2 jobs. One was to keep him awake on the ride home. It was about an hour and a half ride, and he would nod off, and I would have to watch him and poke him, and he would just say, I'm not sleeping, I'm resting my eyes. I was in the front seat, probably without a seatbelt. These days you get arrested for that. And then my other job was to clean all the crabs and clams and fish when I got home. So at a very young age, they put a knife in my hand and taught me how to use a knife. And I remember those summer nights when we got home, because it was usually a feast, and we would catch, when I say crabs, we would catch a bushel, and we would catch, you know, a ton of clams and occasionally a fish, not a lot, but occasionally we get a eel or some flounder or fluke or something like that. But growing up Italian American, we didn't eat crabs the way you normally eat crabs. And I had no idea that the rest of the world ate crabs differently than we did. We used to boil the crab first, Old Bay, whatever. Always an argument, do you put a bottle of beer in there or not? Okay. Crabs would go in, crabs would come out, we take the shell off, clean out the gills or the dead men's fingers, as they would call them, and then we would put them in marinara sauce and let them simmer for about a half an hour, 45 minutes in marinara, and then take that crab gravy, as we called it, and that was over linguine, so we had that, and then we'd sit around picking crabs. If there were clams, they were usually just steamed with some garlic and olive oil and wine, and fish was always fried. But we would sit at the table all night and just pick through crab and eat crab. And I think some of those memories, and especially not so much the cooking of it, but just being around the table with aunts and uncles, extended family and friends, picking crab and seeing what food could do. As a kid, I had to be at the dinner table every night. But seeing how food could bring people around the table, and then of course the talk would go to whether it's politics of the day or a lot of gossip and things like that. Who wasn't talking to who in the family anymore? And but watching what food can do, I think that sort of left an imprint in my mind. And at some point when I was a teenager, probably 14 or 15, and I started cooking at home. My dad was a correctional officer in the county jail in Elizabeth. Why he got his hands on this book that he claimed was in the jail library and brought it home. Actually brought a couple home that day, and I remember there was actually the New York Times cookbook, and I'm not saying this because you're here. That was one that was there. There was I think that was Craig Claiborne's book, actually, yeah. And there was another book that I'm forgetting, but he also brought home Jacques Pepin's La Technique. And when I started cooking at home and using recipes, I remember the first, this is a great story. So, Cuisine Magazine. Everybody remember Cuisine Magazine? I'm at I think I was probably punished. I had to go with my mother to get her hair done at my cousin's salon. So most likely I was punished. That's why I was there. And so I remember picking up this magazine, Cuisine Magazine, and there was this, the cover was about Cajun cooking, and this was before Kate Paul and Emerald, and this was like home cooking. And this great article, and I'm reading through it, and I see this recipe, and I'm like, oh, I could do this. And it was stuffed zucchini, and it had eggplant and onion and shrimp and peppers and stuffed them and baked. And you know, I got through the recipe, but not realized that it was actually an appetizer, so my mom had to actually get up and make a meal after I was done. But I struggled with recipes. Most likely would have been diagnosed with ADHD. All of my children are, 3 boys. They've had actual diagnoses, not something that we think they're hyper. I struggled with reading recipes and trying to figure out a recipe, especially when a lot of it never made sense to me. You get a recipe and it would say, take a shoulder of lamb and tie it, and then sear it on all sides. In 3 tablespoons of oil, sear it on all 4 sides. Take it out of the pan. Cut carrot, celery, onion, leek into 1-inch pieces. Put that in the pan. Cook them until they're a little bit brown. Add some wine. Put the meat back in. Cover. Put in the oven for 3.5 hours. Boy, they could easily say braise the damn shoulder of lamb, which is, how some cookbooks are written. Elizabeth David's books are written like that. But I struggled with these directions, and I couldn't keep up with them. I couldn't figure it out. Now I get this book that talks about recipes are not the important thing, although they are important, but technique is really important. And if you want to learn how to cook, you can cook with recipes, and you can have your favorite recipes, and you can master them and do them really, really well. But if you learn techniques and you learn methods, and then you can actually start creating your own recipes and you do your own thing. And that just did it for me. Because I also didn't want to follow recipes. I just wanted to I just want to get in there and throw stuff around and make food. And this just it spoke to me in a way, and I still remember the introduction. The last paragraph in the introduction, last sentence said, don't treat this book as a cookbook, treat it as an apprenticeship. And as a 15-year-old, and right around the same time, my dad, and we never had these long heart-to-heart talks, and so he just threw out there one day, why don't you become a chef? I was like, okay, sounds
That's
good.
an unusual parent, because usually they say, why are you becoming a chef?
This was my mom and dad loved food. They're both good cooks. I think they saw that I liked it. The idea of my dad passed away when I was 26. So he never saw success. But his mind, I don't think, was me being on Guildhall talking to you right now.
Well, it was television.
Well, definitely not television. It was most likely in a cut-off T-shirt with a cigarette in my mouth, stirring the sauce. And so, but he made that suggestion, and he had a friend of his who did air conditioning and refrigeration, and he had an account at Evelyn's Seafood Restaurant in New Jersey, in Elizabeth, New Jersey. The original one was in Belmar, New Jersey, and this was a seafood restaurant. It wasn't very good, fried and broiled seafood, but it was busy. We did 1,000 covers on a Saturday. It was a busy restaurant. But there was an older guy there who ran the prep kitchen. His name was Slim, a black gentleman from South Carolina. And he would take me under his wing. I started in the prep kitchen. He would take me aside and say, these are the recipes they give me, but this is how I do it. And he taught me quite a bit. I was there for about a year and then kind of bounced around, went to a red sauce Italian restaurant where I learned to butcher, which was great. And then from there, took a job at my first, what I call, good restaurant. It was a restaurant called 40 Main Street. It was in Millburn, Short Hills, New Jersey. Storefront restaurant, 60 seats, but we would do the menu every day. I was a cook there, and the sous chef and the chef, and all of us in the kitchen, we didn't serve lunch. We'd get together in the morning, go over what we had, and just write a menu. And it was a busy restaurant, and so I was there, and then I left from there. I went to a hotel for a short time. I ended up, my first restaurant in New York was the Cook Giraffe. 4-star restaurant. Barry and Susan Wine ran it, and it was a great job, just a fantastic job, loved it. But then I got a call from the owner of 40 Main Street to go back to the restaurant. as the chef. And I took him up on it, and that lasted about 6 months or so. And then from there, I ended up going to France for a little bit and then working for Thomas Keller at Raquel. Most people forget that restaurant. Most people forget that restaurant. They all know of Thomas Keller. They forget that restaurant was, I thought, fantastic.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. It was a little psychotic because you had Serge Raoul, who was his partner, who wanted a bar, a club on one side, and Thomas wanted the serious restaurant on the other side. And it was just a platform between the bar and the dining room. And the server had no idea who they should follow, but we were doing fantastic food then, and so it was no surprise to me that he became the superstar that he is. And then from there, I took my first chef job at Mondrian. That's how I started. And then from there, after Mondrian, I knew Mondrian was closing. I met Danny Meyer in 1991 at the Food and Wine Festival in Aspen. That year, every year they do top 10 new chefs or best new chefs. I was nominated along with Michael Romano. And so I met Danny there. And the following year I went back and we had lunch together. And I said, when I get back to New York, I want to give you a call. And he said, okay. And I knew the restaurant was closing. And I called him and said, we should work together. And his response was, I'll never do another restaurant. And I said, okay, well, just a thought. And a week later, he called me up and said, let's get together. And so he tells a story that Robert Chatterton, who's a wine importer,
right,
who I worked with and Danny worked with, Danny had mentioned to him, Tom reached out to me to do a restaurant, and his response was, if Sandy Koufax called you up and said, I want to pitch for your team, would you let him? And so he called me up, and we ended up traveling. So we decided to take a trip to Italy together. We were there for about 8 or 9 days. And by the time we got back, we had sketched out Gramercy Tavern on the back of the napkin, sort of, what we wanted to do. And interestingly enough, we didn't really talk much about food or service. He knew what I did, I knew what he did, but we talked about the kind of restaurant we wanted to run. We talked about what we thought was missing from the restaurant industry. We talked about how do you make our industry a little more open, a little more easier on people, and we had very much the same ideas about what we thought was missing. So, and that's how Gramercy Tavern was born.
Well, Gramercy opened under a lot of pressure, though, because it was set up in a preview article in New York Magazine as, is this the next 4-star restaurant, or words to that effect?
Right,
and,
that's exactly what it said. There's a story behind that, yeah. It was a lot of pressure, yeah. So the story behind that was Peter Kaminsky, who wrote the article. He sold it originally to the New Yorker, and it was supposed to be a how-to open a restaurant. And when he turned it into New Yorker, the New York took it and said, nope, they rejected it. So he had an article written, and he had to actually shop around. So he shopped to New York Magazine. New York Magazine put the title, the cover on there. This is the next 4-star restaurant.
Well,
that wasn't part of the...
Writers don't write headlines.
That's right.
Editors do.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Don't ever blame me.
Yeah. And so, but it was a lot to live up to. And so what's interesting is we got 2 stars when we opened up, and I thought we deserved 1. And the reason being, I was cooking at Mondrian at a very high level, and we got 3 stars there, and I knew that we weren't coming near that. And we opened in July. They just had their 25th anniversary. We opened, I think, in July. I think it was like July 7th. And the next spring, during the Beard Awards, this is when the Beard Awards were in New York, I knew a lot of chefs from around the country were going to come in. We were a hot new restaurant, but I didn't like what we were doing. But part of that was that we were doing about 260 covers on average every night, maybe 300 on weekends. And so I remember going to Danny and said, Danny, we got to cut back. The food's got to get better. Ruth was absolutely right in her review. Again, I thought she was generous with an extra star. But we need to take a step back. I want to start doing more tasting menus. I want to start doing food that's a little more complex, but I can't do it for 260 people a night. But I can do it for 200 people a night. But the check average will go up because we'll do more tasting menus. I think we'll sell more wine. Maybe on weekends we could do 240, and he agreed to do that, and that's when things changed. And so it didn't happen by happenstance. This was a direction that we decided to go into. We actually lost a partner during that, who was the general manager, because he was dead set against it. But it worked out. But I knew we could do better, so that's kind of Yeah, it was a lot of pressure. It was ridiculous. I mean, and back then it was, pre-social media, where nowadays, we put enough pressure on ourselves with social media, but it was a lot to live up to. Yeah.
And you opened Craft with Danny's blessing? Or
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
No, God.
But it's right behind it.
It opened up a few years later. It opened up, so what happened was, when Danny and I got together, there was no Union Square Hospitality Group. There was Gramercy Tavern, and there was Union Square Cafe and Gramercy Tavern. And he and I went to look at a restaurant on 26th Street, off of Madison. And he was interested in doing the Indian restaurant with Michael Romano there. But he wanted to get my opinion of the space. And I went and looked at it and said, it's not a great space. And it's going to take a lot of work to turn this into a restaurant. As we were walking home, or back to Gramercy, we walked past the MetLife building. And there was two big windows facing the park. And I looked at it and said, this would be a great restaurant. And he said, they called me a couple weeks ago. I said, well, we should go look at it. And we did. And that's when things started to sort of unravel between the two of us. He wanted to start this hospitality group, and I didn't necessarily care for the role that I was going to play in that. And so I said, listen, I'm going to open a restaurant, and you're opening your two restaurants, and I'm going to open a restaurant, and that was all fine. And until the day I went to sign the lease. And then he started he was a little hesitant, but we worked through that. Because Craft was open for 2 years before I left Gramercy. In fact,
Was Marco doing most of the cooking at Craft in those days?
No, Marco was not. Marco Canora, who was at Hearth.
Tom has been a great mentor or person who a number of chefs we all know worked for and built their careers with you.
Yeah, so at Gramercy, no, because Marco worked with me at Gramercy. I think he said Craft. He was a chef at Craft. He was at Gramercy. He actually showed up on my doorstep once. He had hair down the middle of his back. Just came back from riding his motorcycle across country. Had a slim resume, and but there's a few things that he said, and I took a shot with him, and he turned out to be great. But back in the Gramercy days, I had John Benno working there, Marco Canora working there, James Tracy, Akhtar Nawab, all in the kitchen at the same time. They were all junior to these 4 women that I had then. Everybody's now like, women in the kitchen, it's a big deal. We had 4 senior women to these guys who were fantastic. 2 of them, I think, are still working. I think 2 dropped out completely.
Claudia, one of them?
Well, Claudia was in pastry, Claudia Fleming.
Who has the North Fork?
North Fork Table and Inn. There's a new chef there nowadays. It's worth the journey. A guy named Brian Wilson, no, not of the Beach Boys fame, but he's doing really great work. Anyway, but yeah, Marco was the chef at Craft. So anyway, I had to deal to buy Gramercy from Danny, and we had worked it out. And last second, I said, you know what, time for me to go and buy me out, and we worked it out. But I still think, the wisdom of that choice may not have been the best. But at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. But it's bittersweet when I've been in the restaurant. I actually cooked there for a charity event a couple months back. It was kind of bittersweet. It was like walking into your childhood home. And the walls are kind of where they should be, but all things are changed. The furniture's all different. There's different art on the walls, and who are these people in my house? But it was kind of bittersweet, but enjoyed doing it. Yeah.
We're going to take questions from the audience in a few minutes, but before we do, there's one other piece of the Tom Colicchio story that I think has to be covered, and is how did you get into television?
How did I get into television?
And where are you going to go with it?
Yeah, no. The first exposure that my first, this story is great, because I swore I'd never do TV again after this. So my first exposure to TV, I win Best New Chef, Food and Wine Magazine in 1991. I get back home from Aspen. I get a phone call from a producer at the Regis Philbin show. Regis and Kathy. Okay. we want you to come on, and we want you to, do a dish, whatever. So I knew the show a little bit. In the morning sometimes I'd watch it, so I kind of knew what they wanted from a food segment. And so I'd go there, and the producer's there, and I was doing a dish. It was braised red snapper, and the snapper was braised in like a lemon vinaigrette with rosemary and some diced tomatoes, and alongside of that, I was doing an eggplant, kind of like a disc of eggplant that is breaded and fried, and then layered with eggplant caviar, and roasted red peppers, and lemon confit. And so I had everything in my head the way this is going to work. I go there for a rehearsal on a Friday. I'm doing this on a Monday. And so I go through everything. Okay, everything's great. And I'm bringing the food with me in the morning. So I'm leaving the rehearsal, and there's these two stagehands there, who actually I think became kind of part of the show. They were always kind of poking fun at these two guys. So I said, what time should I get here on Monday? Come around 8 o'clock. The show starts at 9. Come at 8 o'clock. Okay. So I show up at 8 o'clock. This producer has called every Tom Colicchio in the phone book. It's not a lot, and they're all relatives of mine. But she didn't have my number because I wasn't listening. I was living in actually with my girlfriend at the time at her house, and this woman is screaming at me from the second I walk in there. I can't believe you missed rehearsal. We should just send you home. You're going to screw this up. I'm getting nervous. I'm freaking out right now, but I'm setting up my station, off camera, setting everything up. And right before she said, I should pull you right now, this is going to be terrible. But great, I'm ready to go on camera, and you're telling me I'm going to be terrible. Awesome. So I get on, and we start rolling through it. You can see, I had a video, I don't know where it is now. But I'm pointing to something. Reese is doing it with me. I'm pointing, and my fingers are shaking. I'm really shaking. But I get through it, and at one point, I put a whole eggplant in to make the eggplant caviar. I had a swap out, and I put it in, and Reese just starts fumbling around with the dials. And I'm like, get over, what are you doing? Come here. He goes, but the oven's not on. And then he goes to me, this is what happens when you miss rehearsal. And I'm thinking, this guy just threw me under the bus now. As it turns out, no, he missed rehearsal. He didn't know I missed rehearsal. We get through the segment, and she's like, that was amazing, that was great. Anytime you want to come back, please come back. I said, I will never do TV again. Years later, I'm doing Martha Stewart at her home. It's a Christmas special, and I'm telling someone the story. And they said, and I'm terrible with names. I don't remember names, but I remember her name. And they said, oh, who was the producer? I said, it was a woman named Barbara Fate. And they went, uh-oh. She's like, no, I'll throw it at her. She's one of our producers. Do you want to say hi? I was like, absolutely not. But I swore I'd never do TV again. And of course, I've done some Today Show after that. But I got a call one day out of the blue from a producer. He said, we're doing this TV show. We think it'd be great. And I said, nah, I'm okay. Called back again. He said, we really think it'd be great. We'd love to come and just talk to you. No. Third time, can we send someone with a camera just to get you on camera? Fine. So they come, they do a little video. Call back and they say, can you come to LA for a proper screen test? No. But there was a documentary made on the opening of Kraft. It was done by an ABC News crew, and it was supposed to air on Nightline, but 9/11 hit and they scrapped it. Eventually it did air on cable somewhere. And so I just sent them that, and they came back and said, we want to make an offer. And I remember saying, well, maybe I'll take a shot at this. And I remember telling my wife, Florence, if anything, maybe I'll help sell books. I got tired of going to book signings and sitting next to Bobby Flay and whomever signing books, and they'd sign 300 and I would sign 2. And I think because they were better chefs, they had better books, but they were on TV. And so I said, well, it's fine, let's do this, expecting maybe some family members would watch it and who knew. But I remember when I agreed to do it, I sat down with them and I said, here's the thing. You have to let the judges make decisions. I'm not going to be some pawn of some producer. They agreed. And I pushed for, my goal was to make sure that our industry, my industry, embraced the show. That they really cared about it. They thought that we were doing something worthwhile, that it was real. And first season went really well. Second season, I started getting phone calls from Daniel Boulud saying, can I get on the show to be a judge? That's where I knew we had something. We start shooting our 17th season in September. We just got our 13th consecutive Emmy nomination. I think I made the right decision. But aside from the awards and the longevity, I think the neatest thing was the amount of chefs, because we actually bring chefs on the show. At this point, you have to be a chef de cuisine, executive chef, maybe a senior sous chef. But the amount of chefs that come off of our show that have won awards, opened multiple restaurants, there's a good probably 150 people that are out there actually working, doing great work. And so it's one of the few reality shows where people are actually coming out of the shows and let's say, giving back to our industry. So we're really proud of that.
That's great. Yeah, you've done a lot of giving back. Now I'd like you to give back to our audience with
I love Q&A.
some Q&A. Is- There's a mic coming.
I'm a big fan of your show. My husband courted me by watching Top Chef. We now have 2 kids, 8 and 6. I would love to know where the location is for the new show, new episode.
Los Angeles. I think I can say this. I'm pretty sure I can. It's out there. Yeah, Los Angeles. I can't. That's all I can say. I know what the finale is too. That I can't tell you. That's going to be great. But yeah, then you'll see why it's Los Angeles when we start.
There are a couple of them over there.
Hi, Tom. I got a loaded question. Cannabis cooking. There's a lot of underground dining right now in Manhattan. With the possible legalization, is that something that you would even consider going forward?
Cannabis cooking. Seems like a waste of good cannabis. I'm not a fan of digesting marijuana. It doesn't. I get very anxious. But I am a huge fan of CBD. I take it every night. Instead of Ambien. I find that it works for me. I'm actually slightly allergic to Ambien. After 4 or 5 days of it, my fingers start to get numb and my face starts to tingle. So I probably have an allergy to it. But I have trouble sleeping and going to sleep at night, and so I find that a very, very micro dose of melatonin, because anyone who takes melatonin is probably taking way too much. A small dose of melatonin and a little, mostly CBD, with this like 30-to-1 CBD, the THC does it for me. But cooking with it, not a big fan of it, but I'm not opposed to like CBD oil and things like that you can cook with. But I think that's more of a I don't know.
So it became a trend.
So I'll be honest. I had a crazy bad experience. So my wife and I were at the Emmys, and it was the day before, or 2 days before. It was her birthday, I guess. No, it was our anniversary. That's right. So we go to MedMen, and we bought a few things. And MedMen is a marijuana store. They're big in California. They look like Apple stores. They don't look like your usual head shop. It's actually pretty neat. So anyway, she gets a drink that she believed was all CBD. And so we go to a movie. We decided in the afternoon we're going to go to a movie to see a documentary. It was a documentary about the triplets. And so, yeah, so we go there. And about a half an hour in, and I remember getting in the car and saying, I'm really thirsty, can I have that drink? It's CBD, right? So I drank about, half of it, maybe more. And she had a few sips as well. Halfway into the movie, I'm losing it. I am just out of it. I'm thinking, what the hell did I take? What did I do? Something. And then I feel like, if you've seen the film, I'm getting manipulated by this film. I really think that the filmmakers, they did a good job, but it's really manipulated because they start with one kid, and then they find the second kid, and then there's the third one, and then so we get out of the theater, and we're in Westwood, and I'm walking around. We're walking. Both of us are stoned out of our minds, and so. I'm walking around I stopped. I said, wait. We got to go back to the car because I have no idea where the car is right now. So, but also, I am not driving. I cannot drive. So we made sure we knew where the car was. We get in an Uber. We go back to the hotel. I fall asleep. I was supposed to go to a party that night, slept right through it, didn't wake up till the next morning, and just like, what the hell happened? So we actually had 2 cars with us. So she gets in her car, we both get in the car together to drive to the parking lot, pick up the second car. All of a sudden you get a text, I'm at a light, I look at my phone, a text. She took a picture of the drink. It was THC. So I dosed myself, and so there were 10 doses in that. So I took about 7, but it was a really bad experience. Anyway, that's a long answer to your question. Sorry, but it was one of those things like read the labels very carefully. But yeah, so the dosage was a little rough.
Personal information, but you would never offer it in your restaurants.
No, you can't right now.
No, right.
Not in New York,
But
anyway.
But if it does, is it something that you would consider?
I considered maybe doing events around it where people knew what they were getting into. But I just find that it's really hard when you're cooking to get the dosage right, and you get a bad experience. You know, you have a Maureen Dowd experience for those. That,
Also, there's such variation depending on your source and all of that, and it's not really regulated. It's very complicated.
yeah, I mean, there's better companies out there that the dosage is right. Columbia Care is one of those companies but they do mostly medical. But there's whole TV shows now. There's what's the name of it? Okay. There's something on Vice. I'm forgetting what it's called. Yeah.
Another question? Up front here.
Number one, I was lucky enough to spend Christmas Eve at Topping Rose when you were there, and I've eaten in a lot of restaurants here. It was the best Christmas Eve meal I ever had here, and I want to thank you.
Thank you.
My guests loved it.
Thanks.
The second question I have is, if you had to pick only one reason, what reason would you pick that would make you leave being chef at a restaurant?
It's a good question. Well, I'll be honest right now. Lawsuits. It's become very, very difficult to run a restaurant. Just every single day, it's either a lawsuit because our website is not compliant for people who are visually impaired, where there is no law around it right now, and so it's like the Wild West. So you just get sued, and you're forced to settle. Or getting these wage and hour lawsuits that are out there. Some people are taking advantage of employees and they should get sued, but there's a lot of small little things out there. For instance, there's something called the 80-20 rule, where if you're a server and you're a tipped employee, 80% of your time has to be customer facing. Okay? So now I have delivery people at Witchcraft. I get hit with the 80-20 lawsuit. Now think about this. A delivery person, when are they customer facing? When they hand a bag to somebody. So you can't be compliant. And I don't want to say what this cost me. But it's slightly under $1 million, but more than 800. And so, but this happens all the time. Now, again, I'll preface this by saying there are people out there who were taking advantage of waitstaff and they deserved everything they were getting. You read about some of these lawsuits, $3 million, $4 million, $5 million. So there was a World Yacht case that became very famous because what they were doing is they were charging a service charge. And let's say they were charging 20% service charge. There was a lawsuit and the courts ruled that if the customer believed it's a gratuity, it's a gratuity. Whether or not the restaurant thinks it is or not, the customer believes it's a gratuity, it's a gratuity. The big case, I think they had to pay like $3.5 million. So there was not so much law written around what you can put if you're charging a service charge, but there was this idea of language that had to be somewhere in a contract. So if you were doing a private party, the contract would have to state, this is the 20% service charge is not a gratuity. It is not shared amongst the staff, blah, 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 blah. So we have that. Now there's some suggestion that it should be on every single thing that the customer sees, even a menu. We had it in our contract. You can't get a menu until you read the contract. Luckily, there's recent court case where they said if it's on the contract and the customer signs off on it, that's enough. It doesn't have to be everywhere, but we get sued anyway. And you'd think it would be a very simple thing. You go to the plaintiff attorney and say, here's our contract. The language is right. It's there. And they would say, okay. But no. They're going to make you go through hoops, and they're going to make you, they want to settle. And so this is why, I'm, this is no, I'm being honest. This is it. It's every single day, waking up, whether or not, wondering whether that case that I'm talking about. I got sued twice. I got sued on a Thursday. I got sued on a Friday. Same restaurant, same language in the case. 2 different plaintiffs, 2 different attorneys. What they do is they send people in. The guy took pictures of materials that he thought. And this is what's even crazier. So, the little shit that comes out of the computer, it didn't have the language on there, but the customer never sees that. There's an internal document that we use to run a P&L on each party. The customer never sees that, so the language wasn't there. But this waiter takes pictures of everything, brings it to this attorney and says, this is all the information. And the attorney assumes that this all goes to the client. Well, it doesn't. And so, this is what we have to deal with. Yeah. Anyway.
Any other questions? Brought one right there.
How do you treat your land during the winter when you're not growing anything?
How do I treat my...
Your land on your farm?
Oh, not a farm, it's a garden. I plant some cover crops, and some of it we just leave, but there's like spinach, we overwinter spinach and things like that. We do plant a few things that are cover crops. I have garlic that goes in the fall, but that's generally it. It's all in raised beds, so, and then getting ready for the spring, we start adding compost. But that's usually it. Yeah.
Any other questions? Right there.
Yellow. Oh, sorry.
How do you feel about the no tipping policy?
Oh, great question. So the no tipping policy. I actually started in one of my restaurants, but at Kraft, we had reopened lunch service, so I started there. Didn't go over very well. I know Danny Meyer's a big proponent of no tipping. He's struggling with it. Every time one of the restaurant goes to no tipping, he loses a lot of wait staff. The wait staff doesn't like it, and the customers don't like it. But there's a reason why I like it. I want it to go through. Again, going back to the lawsuits, a lot of these lawsuits revolve around policies around tipping and around tipped employees and what they can do, what they can't do. If you get rid of tipping, you get rid of those lawsuits. That's why I wanted to do it. It wasn't for paying the back of the house more money. In fact, that was never a goal of mine. My feeling is, if someone starts working as a cook, they kind of know what they're going to make. But they also can work their way up. Going from a cook to a sous chef, you're doubling your salary. Going from a sous chef to a chef to cuisine, you're doubling your salary. So there's some upward movement for cooks. Wait staff, maybe not. So my feeling is I'd rather, and Danny's some kind of a complicated solution to try to figure out what the waiters are going to make. For me, it was straight. We knew based on 3 years of data how much a captain made at the restaurant, and so we were going to make them whole. That came out to about $28 an hour, I guess. For a captain, about $20 for a server, $18 for a back waiter. But the way to deal with that was you can't put a service charge on an a la carte restaurant. You have to just raise prices. But you didn't raise prices. Let's just say everybody got a 20% increase in pay. You can't raise prices by only 20% because you got to pay tax on it. So we had to raise prices by about 26, 27% to make it work. And that's what I was hoping to do. But the problem is, if we're the only restaurant doing that, our prices are going to be, a lot more expensive than other restaurants, and restaurants of fine dining restaurants. And so we decided that it probably wouldn't go over very well. And when we tried it at lunch, it didn't. People still wanted to leave tips. And what I hear more often than not is we want to reward people for good service. Well, if it's a pooled house, your extra gratuity isn't really going that far. I mean, it's great that you're doing that, and it's great to acknowledge good service and you're paying more money. But in a pooled house, vice versa, if you're trying to penalize someone and you're going to give a really bad tip, it doesn't affect them because it's a pooled house. Now, if you listen, my feeling on whether you're going to punish someone with a tip, if you get bad service, find a manager and say, listen, I had really bad service. You know, restaurants, if you get a dish and it's not done to your liking, please don't sit there and push it around and eat it and then go on social media and say I had a really bad dish. Send it back. If it's too salty, send it back and say it's too salty. Can you please do it over? Be happy to do it. I always say I get, you know, you'll get a complaint and say, well, so-and-so, the service is a little slow and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, I can't do anything now that you're not here. Speak up when you're in the restaurant, we'll fix it. In fact, that's the mark of a good restaurant. How do you fix a problem? And that's how we train our staff to do, not hide from problems. One of the best service experiences I've ever had in my life was at a steakhouse in Miami, believe it or not, Miami. And I was there during the Food and Wine Festival. I ordered a steak, I was with my publicist, we ordered a steak, it was medium rare porterhouse. It came out medium well. It was served to me, I'm like, I don't want to be that guy. They knew who I was, I don't want to be that guy, I didn't say anything. Waiter comes over, looks at the steak and said, you ordered medium rare. I said, yeah, he goes, it's medium well. I said, that's okay. He goes, no, took it. And very quickly replaced it with medium rare. That was good service. Because a lot of waiters were just backed away and said, well, let's see if he complains. I wasn't going to because I just don't want to call attention to myself. And so I don't want to be that chef guy. And so, but that was great service to me. That was proactive service. That was the server getting involved and saying, this isn't to your liking and I'm going to fix this. And so to me,
in a steakhouse, that's easy because they've got steaks being fired at every temperature all the time in a busy one. Normally, if you're party of 4, let's say, and your dish somehow doesn't work and you want to send it back, it kind of screws up the timing with everybody at the table.
Yes, and
how do you handle that?
Yes, and so, but that said, if the restaurant's busy, there's always things that are being fired. So it's not like you have a bunch of steaks backed up, but if you have 3 or 4 tables fired, most likely we're working on, if it's a sea bass, so we'll have that sea bass kind of ready to go, and then everything gets pushed back a little bit, but you can get something out quickly. If you can't, then there's things that you can do but yeah, there's a timing issue. But you can get that food on the table quickly. Most restaurants, nothing takes more than 12 minutes to cook. And with the exception of a few things, even rack lamb takes 12 minutes to cook. So things you can figure something out. A good restaurant figures something out. Yeah.
What I find interesting on the tipping issue is that I've seen more and more restaurants in countries like Italy and France and England are no longer service included.
Really?
Yeah. And it's awkward because there is no tip line on the bill.
Right.
And they want the tip in cash. Now, I don't know if they're lying to me or what, but I've seen this increasingly. And you're at a point where you have to say, is the tip included?
Yeah. The tip in cash thing, see, to me, that, I keep joking around with my management team. That is one way to actually insulate yourself from some of these lawsuits because there's, again, language that you're not even supposed to get involved in a tip pool. That the tip is not yours, it belongs to the server. So my feeling is, if everyone left cash, at the end of the night, I could just go drop it in the center of the table and go, it's yours, and walk away from it, which would be fine. But right now, we would put tips, if you leave a tip on a credit card, it goes on a check, a paycheck. We don't give them cash. It goes on, we have to do this now. Going back 15 years ago, the IRS made sure that we were tracking who was getting paid and what they were getting paid. So most of our servers get, all of them, even cash that comes in ends up on a paycheck. But that would be one way to do it. But I don't know, I wish we would go away from it. I think that if it's included in the price of the meal, it becomes a real meritocracy in terms of the restaurant. Because servers can get raises if they do a great job. And so again, the power of the person who has that the tip they think is controlling something. If you complain about a server and then it goes to in their file, then when it comes time to evaluate that person, maybe they won't get the raise they thought they were getting. So it just becomes the way every other business in the world works for hospitality. So anyway.
We have time for one more question. Is right there.
We have 2. She's been waiting here.
All right.
So 2 more. Okay.
2.
What was the most memorable meal, whether because it was really good or really bad, the most memorable meal from Top Chef?
Oh, Top Chef. What's my mic? Oh, there it is. Most memorable, I don't know. I would say I think one of the better dishes that I remember, because it was so simple and so good, Paul Key, he did his roasted vegetables, or vegetables in dashi. And it was so simple but so good and so clean. It was one of the dishes that sticks with me. But some of the finales, this past finale, both meals were incredible. I remember was the finale with Gregory and Mei Lin. That was probably some of the best food that we had at the finale. Just those two combined that were really, really great. I mean, we've been fortunate. When we say the food's good, it's good. If we say it's not so good, it's probably not. We're pretty honest about it. And often the chefs, for some reason, they're a little tentative when they first start. And if I feel that they're not living up to or not sort of doing the food that I think they could do, I'll give them a talk to. Yeah. The other thing I'll say about the show that most people don't know is we'll always get, didn't you see this happen? How could you judge that way? Because, so-and-so, we don't know that stuff that's out there happening, we have no idea it's happening. We're not allowed to interact with the chefs unless we're on camera. So if they're walking, if we're on the set, we don't talk to them. We don't see them, we're not allowed to interact with them at all. I don't know those people. The only time we get to question them is when I'm doing a walkthrough or at judge's table, but that's it. And then they're not allowed TV, phones, books, magazines, music, nothing. They're just, that's how we force them to interact with each other. They have nowhere to go. And the other thing is, we usually have 6 to 7 cameras running 16 hours a day. It takes 2 days to make an episode. You see 48 minutes of that. So a lot of times I get, didn't you said this. Yeah, I said a lot of things. You don't see most of it. Most of the time, the 4 judges can sit there and tell you within 2 seconds who's going to win and who's going to lose. But that wouldn't make a show. So.
Okay, the last question was over there.
Having lived in Gramercy Park for most of my life, when it was still publishing, before any of these places came up, and really relishing in, I worked with Sam Aaron. I don't know, Florence, if you know who Sam Aaron was, and Sherry Lehman, and got a great wine background, and always was into great food. Living out here on a compromised budget, it's so frustrating to not be able to get the meal that you want without really just killing your pocketbook. Even though they have restaurant weeks, if there's anything that can be done to just try to make that great cuisine and that great experience more available to people that just can't spend $200 a person on a meal, it would be great.
Well, restaurants are expensive, and I think they've become more expensive for a lot of reasons. Food costs are expensive, labor costs are much higher, rents are astronomical. Don't take this the wrong way, but cook at home. Yeah, cook at home. I know it's nice, but I don't go out much. I stay home and cook. I don't go out to restaurants. No, but I was serious when I say that because and find people ask all the time, how can I be a better cook? Cook. Yeah. And so, I agree to. I go out occasionally. I go to like a neighborhood restaurant. I'm still shocked at how expensive it is. Restaurants are expensive, and they're not going to get any less expensive. In fact, I just see, listen. If we're having a good month, and we make 10%, that's a great month. And we don't do that every month. We do that, restaurants make their money in the 4th quarter. 2nd quarter, a little bit. Maybe 1st quarter, 3rd quarter, no, 1st quarter, 2nd quarter, break even, 3rd quarter, 4th quarter, maybe make money. So restaurants aren't making a ton of money. And quite frankly, I think that, in a way, food should be more expensive. But that said, that's why I say, if you want, good food for less money, you're going to have to do it yourself, unfortunately. But yeah, you can take advantage of restaurant weeks and things like that. But I just see a trend of restaurants becoming more expensive. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I can see that we haven't got enough time, but that's the way it is, because we didn't get a chance to discuss cooking at all, really.
Oh, okay.
That'll be a return
We'll
visit.
come back and just cooking only.
But I want to thank you so much, Tom. This is fascinating.
Have a great rest of your summer.